Hello, everyone. Welcome to this virtual Lunch and Learn session, which is focused on careers your advisor never told you about. So that sounds like it's a little bit of a strange topic when we're talking about doing these workshops. And what it really boils down to is looking at my own past and looking into the future of what I want to leave for everybody else. And that is one thing: options. Your career is your career, and the best way that you can discover that is by knowing what options you have that are out there. My own personal experience with that is when I was just trying to set forth on my career, my advisors at the time found out that I was really interested in moving into industry. And they came to me and basically said, "We are so sorry that you're leaving science." Well, the fact is I didn't leave science. I do more science now than I would have if I had stayed into that career path which they had designed for me. What we're talking about today and what we're going to present today are 4 panelists. These are individuals who have decided to chart their own career path. And they may be very different than what you would hear about from your academic advisor or even sometimes your first employer. So this applies not just to those of you who are beginning your early careers, but this applies to anybody who is looking to discover what is the best solutions for them and their life at whatever stage of life that they're in. So I would like to actually first off thank all of the panelists. And while normally I would give an introduction, part of this entire process is for them to tell you about themselves. And so I'm going to let them do it best. But the panelists are Carrie Benson, Jacqueline Robinson-Ham, Yvette Seeger, and Angela Stoyanovich. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, one more slide here, very quick. If you will notice down to the bottom right over here, there is a box that says Q&A. Because of the nature of this event, we actually can't have everybody talking at the same time. So we would ask you to utilize this Q&A option. Make certain that you select under the ask that you select all panelists. That way, if your question is to one person and somebody else has, some input on it, they can participate in giving the answer for that as well. Okay, so thank you very much. And on that, I'll stop talking and leave it to the panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and tell my story. My name is Carrie Benson. I'm a registered dietitian. I have a master's degree in neuroscience, a master's degree in nutritional epidemiology. I also, of course, have the registered dietitian credential. And my career path, I started out in the developmental alcohol research field, and then I made that transition to clinical dietetics. And then more recently, I've actually become a book author, and now I'm, I guess, a budding blogger and website developer as of the last month. So to go way back to college, my story started out when I was a sophomore at the University of Delaware. A lot of my friends were joining research labs. I knew I wanted to pursue a career in science. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, like a lot of people do when they start off in college. So I thought, hey, maybe I should join a research lab, get some experience under my belt, just kind of see what it's all about. So I joined the lab of Dr. Anna Klinsova at University of Delaware, as I mentioned. And I worked there all through the end of my college career. I completed a thesis project, and I really enjoyed the experience of being involved in research. And the research that we did was focused on a rodent model of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and looking at how alcohol during development can impact different regions of the brain. So I became very passionate about how alcohol could affect development, and that kind of carried on with me, but I didn't really know I had that passion until a little bit later. So I'll get into that. When I got to the end of my first master's degree, I thought I had gained a really good experience, a lot of skills, but I had kind of decided that I didn't want to pursue a career in research. For whatever reason, I just kind of felt like it wasn't going to be satisfying to me and that I really wanted to do something in the clinical field. But I didn't know what that was because I had already decided I didn't want to be a doctor, and there's just so many options in the clinical field. You know, do you want to be a PA? Do you want to be a nurse practitioner or physical therapist? I went through all of the options, and then it was just one day I heard about this registered dietitian career, and it just clicked for me. I had developed this passion for nutrition, and I was like, wow, why didn't I know about this however many years ago? So I, did more research into it. I tried to talk to people in the field, get a sense of, what options there were in the field. And then when I ultimately decided to pursue a career in nutrition, I tried to go about it in a way that would give me a lot of options. So that was one of the reasons why I chose the program I went to at Tufts, was because I could pursue the dietetics credential. I could just do a focus on epidemiology and even go into research if I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I could go the public health route. So I really thought through and made a choice based on my ability to have the most options for my career at that time. And then as I went through my training there, I said, you know what, I really do want to become a registered dietitian. So I went through all the necessary steps to get that credential. There's a lot of coursework that you have to do. You have to complete 1,200 hours of supervised training, and then you have to take an exam to demonstrate that you're board certified. Then you obtain your license and you're able to practice. So what I do now as a dietitian, I kind of have two roles. I have a conventional career, I guess I would say conventional, kind of traditional career path as a dietitian, where I'm working in a hospital setting and dealing with anybody who comes into the hospital if they need any sort of nutrition education, if we need to prescribe them medical nutrition therapy. So if they come in and they need nutrition support. It's been very interesting as kind of a newer dietitian. I only got my credential 2 years ago, kind of growing into this role during the pandemic, but it's given me a lot of good experience, I guess. So once I got that registered dietitian credential, or I guess I should say, as I was going through my training, I connected with a girl who was going through the program at the same time as me, and we really bonded over the fact that we were coming from different career paths and then pursuing this new dietitian career together. And she had this opportunity to work with a publishing company to write a mocktail recipe book aimed at pregnant women. And because of the work that I had done working with Dr. Klinsova and all of the research that I'd done in the FASD realm, she was like, I think you'd be a really great person to work with this on. I was like, you know what, this sounds like the best way for me to merge kind of my training that I had in neuroscience and developmental alcohol research with my new career as a dietitian. It was just such a unique opportunity that I had to say yes. I was going to work on it and get that book out, whatever it took, because it just was like the best opportunity that could have ever happened to me. So we published that book. It's called Drinking for Two: Nutritious Mocktails for the Mom-to-Be. We've been really lucky that it's gotten a great response. And for me, the most satisfying part is being able to get out in a very public way, but in also a very friendly way, that message about, consuming alcohol during pregnancy and helping to raise awareness on FASDs. And then after we had that opportunity, that led to a second book opportunity. So we're going to be publishing another mocktail recipe book just in a couple of months. And that's kind of an interesting part of my story too, which is that from this first book, which led into the second book of, mocktail recipes, when my co-author Diana and I were writing it, we started doing a lot of research on the effects of alcohol and health, the relationship between alcohol and health. And that really kind of resonated with me on a personal level and made me change some of my behaviors and choices. And now I've actually been completely alcohol-free since January. And the two of us have gotten really into the Sober Curious movement, if anybody's heard of that. And we've become really passionate about alcohol-free living. So it's interesting for me how, some of the career choices that I made have also kind of influenced me as a person. It's just kind of an iterative cycle. So, yep, now because we've had that passion instilled in us for alcohol-free living, my co-author Diana and I are kind of launching I don't know whether to call it a brand or a business. It's still very much in the early stages, but we're creating a website and a blog and we're calling ourselves the Sober Dietitians. And we're hoping to help people kind of on their journey to exploring their relationship with alcohol and alcohol-free living. So that'll be launching pretty soon. That's pretty much, you know, my story, my life over the past 12 years, I guess. I don't know if I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but if anybody has any specific questions for me, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I have one comment. It's not so much a question, it's more of a comment. And that is, early on, you decided to build your path with as many options as you could possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you then have enabled yourself to maneuver wherever other opportunities have arisen. Mm-hmm. So is there any one point, though, where you said, I don't see any opportunities, I'm going to make one for myself?
That's interesting. That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I would say I haven't seen any opportunities for myself. I think what's been really interesting about authoring these books and now kind of starting this this venture with my co-author Diana, I think I've discovered kind of the limitations of the career path that I was on as a clinical dietitian, which I knew could be an issue. There's not a lot of opportunity for advancement, but it didn't really hit me that was going to be how it was until I was in the field for a little bit of time and working and kind of seeing the limitations. And then having the contrast of, being able to kind of work for myself and create my own opportunities. Yeah, so it really just through experience, I guess. I see a question from my dear friend, Karen Boshin. Do you feel that your preclinical research early in your career has been helpful in your clinical work or your FASD outreach work? Of course. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be here today doing what I'm doing right now without that experience. So obviously that preclinical research experience, it not only gave me, a lot of skills that I'm able to still utilize in my, various jobs, but it also, instilled in me that passion that I have for, alcohol in general, the relationship between alcohol and health, and in particular, alcohol and pregnancy, and getting out that message of, avoiding alcohol during pregnancy being the safest option. So yeah, it's been extremely helpful. And then something else that I guess kind of along the lines of skills that I think has been really beneficial for me in the clinical realm is I feel like in the research world, you really learn to be kind of open-minded and never assuming that you know everything, because there's kind of an awareness that you only know so much, and there's so much more that you could potentially know, and you sort of recognize that other people have, knowledge that you don't have. And in the clinical world, that's not always the case. You encounter a lot of individuals who think they know everything. So I think for me, I'm proud to kind of have that research mentality in a clinical setting. Yeah. So thank you for your question, Karen. Any other questions or comments? If anybody wants to stay connected, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, obviously, Carrie Benson. And then my co-author and my new venture, the Sober Dietitians, we're on LinkedIn and TikTok, and we have a website, thesoberdietitians.com. It hasn't officially launched yet, but it's most of the way there. So if you want to check it out, that's where you can find out more.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Can I make a comment there? I just love Carrie's story. What I noticed is that, and I find this to be true of all of us as scientists at any level, from entry to senior level scientists in whatever path we've taken, is Carrie kind of allowed her curiosity to lead her. And, you know, even though she started in a traditional track and still got certifications on top of degrees, right? What is so cool and in alignment with trends in society, you know, you're using words like plant-based, right? What a popular theme these days. Mm-hmm. And I think just even the awareness around alcoholism for moms, I thought that was so cool. I mean, I have a girlfriend right now who's nursing, and, you know, we all go over, we're all drinking, but she's not drinking. And there's just such a social peer pressure around mm-hmm. that as a lifestyle. So I just want to thank you for your work. And a theme for me has always been allowing curiosity to lead you. That really is the test, I think, of a true scientist. So thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's really cool to be bringing these issues to light, but I feel like Diana and I are just sort of more like not poster children. That's a little bit dramatic, but, you know, we're just kind of becoming like the face of bringing this information to light, but, you know, it wouldn't be possible with all the people doing the research in the background, that we're just putting the word out. We're just kind of connecting it to people. So it's great to do that.
So it's interesting that Angela noted that sober living is more of a trendy option right now. Mm-hmm. I haven't had a drink in over 2 years. I've never been trendy in my life. So for the first time ever, I can say I'm now on trend.
Very much on trend.
Okay.
That's great.
And along with the curiosity, one of the things I've noticed is when you speak about your career path now and what you're doing now, the passion of it actually shows in your face. So curiosity and passion. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Moving on, I do believe, Jacqueline, are you next?
I believe so, yes. So I am going, thanks, Alex, for passing the ball. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got some slides to share with you all. My name is Jacqueline Robinson Ham. I am currently a science policy analyst at the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology, which is quite the mouthful, so we just call it FASEB. So you'll hear that from here on out. My boss, Dr. Yvette Seeger, is actually going to be speaking right after me. So she's going to get into the weeds of like, what is science policy? What does a career in science policy look like? I am going to take a different route and instead, since I'm pretty early in my career still, talk to you about how I prepared for a career beyond the bench. So I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington in bioengineering. That is a research intensive program even for undergrads. So I did volunteer in a lab about 25 hours a week for 3 years and change. Through that process, I found I really liked the research and my mentors felt I was pretty good at it. I was pretty good at writing fellowship applications and similar. So it didn't take long until, you know, I had really the right encouragement to pursue a graduate degree. And furthermore, I had some connections from folks in classes above me, 3 to 5 years older than me, that went off to biotech with just their BS. And found that they were running into some walls in terms of they liked what they did, but for promotions, sometimes some larger companies especially will just require that you have a degree that they didn't have. So I was interested in staying in the academic route and doing the PhD, postdoc, PI situation, but I would say I wasn't dead set on it. But I did know that going to get my PhD would open up doors for me that maybe would otherwise be closed. So after I finished up with my undergrad degree, I went straight into graduate school and I got my PhD at Duke University. During that time, especially the first and second year, I think it was very noticeable to me that my mental health as well as my physical health were really starting to plummet. And so I just decided that I didn't think I wanted to stay in the academic path. I didn't think it would be a good life decision for me, especially in terms of both my mental and physical health. So in my second year, I sort of abandoned the idea that I would do this whole postdoc to PI route. I was like, let's finish graduate school, let's get the PhD, and then let's see what else is out there for me. So I started doing a lot of informational interviews beginning my second year. I made it a priority to do 1 to 2 a month. And I did that for about a year and a half. And I was looking at a variety of different careers. And through my first, year and a half or so at graduate school, knowing that I really didn't want the bench research life anymore, especially in bioengineering in particular, a lot of people go work at startups, which is just as demanding as being in an academic institution in terms of hours and irregularity. So I knew I wanted something a little more 9 to 5-ish, a little more structured. So I started doing informational interviews with science writers, medical science liaisons, science policy folks, sort of all over the map. And I felt like, excuse me, sorry, my allergies are crazy right now, so my nose is quite runny, but I found it was really important to speak to multiple people in the same general career sector. So I didn't only speak to one science writer, I spoke to, I think, 4 or 5, because there's different company sizes, they have different expectations, their day-to-day is different. If you stop your career exploration by only speaking to one person, you're probably not getting the full picture of what that career could be for you. I also found it to be really important as I was going through this exercise to try to talk to the people who would be in the position I would want to have. And in many cases, that was an entry-level position. So a lot of high up folks were very generous in giving their time to me, even, heads of science policy, for example. And sure, they have great insights, but their day-to-day life is not what my day-to-day life would be going into that job. So I think if you're talking to someone pretty high up, you'll get a good idea of sort of the vision of the company and the overall goals. And they know, of course, what their employees are doing, but what they are doing is not what you would be doing. So if you sort of want the nitty-gritty truth, I would try to talk to someone more at the junior level. And the way that I went about this is I utilized my alum networks from both the University of Washington and Duke, where I got my degrees, and also just LinkedIn. You would be surprised if you cold message someone and are polite and say, I'm interested in XYZ career. I noticed you work for ABC company doing XYZ thing. If you have 30 minutes to spare, I would really appreciate your time. I probably have like a 2/3 success rate in those kind of honestly cold LinkedIn messages, like we have no other connections. So it never hurts to try. The worst thing that can happen is they say no, or they don't respond, and then you just move on to the next. No big deal. So as far as my career timeline goes, I defended my PhD in July of 2018. An important thing for me was I actually secured my employment in February of 2018 with a delayed start date. I found that really helpful for my anxiety and my life planning. If that's a situation you can work out with your research advisor, if they're okay with you applying to jobs maybe earlier than they would like, I would highly suggest it. After that, I took 1 month off. I took August of 2018 off. I would also suggest you take some time off between defending and starting your job if you can, if you have the means. And then I started as a results analyst at clinicaltrials.gov in September of 2018. I really enjoyed that job. I was sort of planning on staying there for 2 years or maybe even a little bit longer, but this really cool job posting came up at FASEB to be a science policy analyst. So I jumped at that. I wasn't actively applying to jobs. I applied to the single job at FASEB, and it ended up being a really great fit. And so I've been here at FASEB since November of 2019. So some things I want to point out briefly is you have a lot of really key skills as a scientist, particularly if you're doing bench science. You've got great critical thinking skills, you're reading a ton, you are synthesizing that information, and you're analyzing a ton of data, your own data, as well as other folks' data. You are probably detail-oriented. Not every scientist is, but it is a pretty common trend. And you're also probably pretty high on the executive functioning scale. Maybe not right now during the pandemic. I think everyone's executive functioning is down right now. There's actually a lot of really interesting research linking trauma to lower executive functioning, but you'll bounce back. And I think you'll find that compared to sort of the average worker, you are quite high functioning. You are absolutely able to juggle multiple projects. That just is science. There's not ever a time where you're only doing one thing. And you're coordinating and collaborating constantly, whether that is coordinating with your lab members for shared equipment or actual collaborations across labs. Maybe you're coordinating and collaborating with core facilities at your university. That is a constant. And finally, you're also constantly communicating your science mostly, whether that is within your lab, just between members trying to teach and mentor other folks or be mentored. Maybe it's lab meeting, and then there's more formal avenues like papers and conferences. Ultimately, though, try to apply these skills to a different setting. So you can do all of these things as a scientist, and you can try to paint your resume with just that. But if you can take those skills and put them somewhere else, for example, student government or student groups are a really great place. That is a line you can have on your resume that I think is very compelling. Full disclosure, I've never been a hiring manager, so I don't know this for sure, but every interview I've ever done, the baseline assumption going in is that I am a good scientist, They want to know if I can apply my skills that I learned as a scientist to other things. So if you have concrete examples of that on your resume, it's going to be a lot easier for you to stand out. And then you'll also have examples to talk about during your interview. So I was very active in student government. We also had a women in science and engineering student group on campus that I was active in. And mind you, I never took a leadership role. I was never an officer in any of the examples I'll say today, but I found ways to be pretty constantly involved in activities and making an impact. So I still had a lot of stories to come out from that. Volunteer with your scientific society. So if you are a member of a scientific society, which I hope you are, there are usually volunteer opportunities from you. Sometimes these are little one-off things, just help with a booth at a conference. Sometimes it's a larger commitment. You could have a seat on a committee, for example. A lot of scientific societies have professional development committees or trainee committees, which may be especially of interest to you. So those are a great way to get involved, use your skills elsewhere, and also expand your network. Write for a newsletter. So this might be a newsletter at your scientific society, maybe it's in your department or something larger like the graduate school or for the postdoc office. But a lot of folks, a lot of places have newsletters and they will usually take volunteers to help write for them. It's good to practice your writing outside of the scientific, jargon-heavy, dense writing. Depending on what kind of job you're looking for, many jobs are going to require a more lay kind of writing. It's not informal, I would say, but it's definitely to a different audience. And you may even need to have a writing sample to apply to the job. So this could help you out with that. Explore different courses and certifications sort of outside of your immediate area. So I have randomly taken a law course. I randomly took a business course. I found those really enlightening. Duke University had a regulatory affairs certificate course, which helped me learn that I didn't want a career in regulatory affairs. So these are all great things to explore, and don't stop just at your own university, especially in the digital age. Like I said, it just never hurts to ask. So I went to Duke University. The University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is about 8 miles away. At the time when I was there, Duke didn't really have much science policy activity, but UNC did, and they even had a certificate program. So I emailed the coordinator of that, and I was very honest. I just said, hey, you know, I'm a student at Duke. I'm not a student at UNC, but if it would be allowable for me to come to this activity, I would really appreciate it. And they were very generous and said, look, we can't give you a certificate because you're not a student here, but if you want to come and learn the things and network with everyone, that's totally fine. And I think the same is true with online. Feel free, I would say, to email people and be polite and ask. And if it's a no, it's a no. That's fine. Some things are just going to be for folks who pay to be at that university, but it might be a yes. You never know. And then really organize events. There are very few jobs where you'll get away with not having to organize anything. And so even if you're just ordering pizza for your departmental seminar or something, some amount of you being able to have a story and show people, hey, I do know how to organize an event is super beneficial. So really, I want to emphasize that aside from all of these things helping with your resume and being able to get a job and building your network, it's so great to find a community outside of your lab. Of course, it does build your network, but it's also the place where I made some of my most reliable friendships and peer-to-peer mentorships. Like I said, I was in bioengineering. Most of my best friends from graduate school were in the chemistry department. And so both of those departments in particular are quite gossipy. So it was really important for all of us to have someone outside of the department when something happens and you can go take a walk, grab a coffee, vent, and you know it's not going to get back to anybody in your department. And these are folks who, to this day, we are really good friends. They are amazing mentors to me. We help each other out with career things. You'll never know what is out there if you stay siloed in your lab or in your department, and there are wonderful opportunities elsewhere. So like I said, Yvette's going to talk more about science policy. I haven't really spoken at all what my experience in that is like. It's good. I like it. If you want to connect offline at any point, feel free to email me. Is probably the best. I am on LinkedIn, but I'm not very good at checking it. I am very good at checking Twitter, so that is also a great way to reach me. And if there are any questions now, I'd be happy to take them. But otherwise, you know, looking forward to hearing what Yvette has to say about science policy.
So I'm going to jump in again. Why? Because I'm rude and I always want to hear my own voice, apparently. So one of the things that I've really noticed about your entire talk is this dependency on these interpersonal skills. And you have utilized those extremely well, and you've laid out ways to actually go about doing this. Most scientists that I know do not have great interpersonal skills. What advice can you give to people who actually find that challenging?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key here is that it's a skill, right? So just like I was not very good at tail vein injections for a while, but once you do repetitions, you get better at it. So you really kind of have to just jump in and work on it. I do think bigger forums where maybe you don't have to speak all the time is really helpful. So the student government group that I joined at Duke was about 80 to 100 people. There were representatives from every department, and you could chime in when you felt it was important, but otherwise you could sort of sit back and just observe. And I thought that was a really great training ground for a lot of people to learn how to interact with people from a lot of different backgrounds and speak respectfully, but there was a lot of dissenting, for example. So I'm a big proponent of group activities, but you do have to put yourself out there ultimately. You have to start somewhere and just know that with practice, you will get better.
Thank you, Jackie. I do not see any questions popping up. I think if we pause for about 30 seconds, if somebody actually has a question that they want to put forward, please take the time to do so.
Paul, while we're waiting for any questions in the chat, I was just going to also comment about the writing that Jacqueline mentioned and how to write without the heaviness of the scientific jargon. I mean, that is such a skill that has been really difficult for me. And I think the academic track sometimes pigeonholes us into diving in so deeply into the details. But Jacqueline, thank you for just outlining so many amazing tips on how you can strengthen those aspects. And to your point, about interpersonal skills, Paul, I think you're right. I think we think when we start out as scientists that we're never going to have that, and we just put ourselves in a box so quickly, but it's just simply not true. When you're passionate about a topic and you hone in on your or sharpen your interpersonal skills, I mean, really the sky is the limit at that point. I think Jacqueline just outlined that so well. Thank you for that.
So Jacqueline, we do have a couple of questions here for you. One from Karen and one from Ashley.
Wonderful. Sorry, I hadn't scrolled down in the Q&A, so I was just seeing the earlier question to Carrie, so scrolling. Okay. I'd be interested in knowing more about the specific day-to-day of your job. Yvette is going to talk about that a little bit. I think hers is slightly different from mine as she holds a higher position. For me, the days vary quite a lot, but on an average week, I would say I spend 30 to 40% of my time in meetings. A few of those are internal. Most of that is external, covering events. Every day I do a lot of reading. So there's just some policy readings to be done in the morning, and then I do a lot of subject matter specific reading. So my job specifically, I look at training and career opportunities mostly for graduate students and postdocs. So I read things like Inside Higher Ed, the Chronicle of Higher Education every day. And then there are reports that come out occasionally that cover these topics from places like the National Academies often does these reports, which are quite long, but very high quality. So I spend a lot of time reading. And then the rest is, it's a really fun job because I feel like I get paid to read things, attend events, and then I sit around and think about them, and then I write about them. So yeah, that's the normal day, I would say. A lot of what we do ends up being reactive. So the government will ask for information on a certain topic and we respond to that. But during the downtime, I do get to do some more proactive things. So things that I think the Federation would appreciate seeing move forward in the training space. And then what type of PhD programs might help get in the field? It really depends on what you want to do, but for most careers beyond the bench, I think most PhDs will be perfectly suitable. there aren't a ton of science writing jobs or science policy jobs or medical science liaison jobs, anything like that, where they're very specifically only looking at, we only want bioengineers or we only want synthetic chemists or anything. I think in general, from my perspective, most things in the natural sciences or even beyond, you're going to be fine. That being said, don't get a PhD just to get a job. Okay, like if you're gonna go to a PhD program, you need to want to do it for the PhD and for that experience.
Could not agree more. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So I think we're going to move on at this time, and Yvette is up next.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen. All right, and it's very interesting to listen to Jacqueline talk about her perspective, and it made me reminisce getting into science policy. So I'm at the point in my career where I've reinvented myself almost as many times as Madonna, so yes, my general day-to-day is different, but I will talk a little bit more about the career path to science policy, and just piggybacking on a comment that was made earlier. I think it was Jacqueline just talking about multiple people in the same field. If you talk to 12 science policy analysts or 12 science policy people, you will get 13 to 14 different stories about what the career path is. So definitely explore, and hopefully what you'll see from my story is that there are a lot of different ways to work in science policy. I'm pleased to say that this first slide is a joke in terms of, you could type, what is a career path to science policy? But when I was trying to Google this, or at the time I was doing my initial career search, the main search engine was Yahoo. That's how old I am. So, but now there's so much more information out there. So in addition to our comments today, I highly encourage you to do your own research, both on the web, but talking to tons of people who their jobs just sound cool to you. Let's see, gotta wake it up. So a little bit about me. So the most important thing that I think is about me is that I am from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm from the west side of Cleveland, which means that I come from working class stock. I had never met a scientist until I learned that my dentist wife had a PhD in microbiology. My dad worked at an automotive company working on the line. My mom was a teacher. My family worked in steel, and then all of a sudden they had this kid that loved science. Luckily, my parents really fostered that passion for science and did anything that they could, any resources they could devote to try and foster that passion, even when my high school didn't really have a ton in terms of science. Like many Ohio kids, I selected one of the many liberal arts colleges in our great state of Ohio. I selected Ohio Wesleyan University, mainly because I started having a passion for genetics. DNA seemed so cool to me. And Ohio Wesleyan, for a liberal arts college, had an undergraduate track that was focused on genetics. It was through, you could go either the microbiology route or zoology. I chose zoology because I like animals. But also, while I was there, because it was a liberal arts college, you have to take a certain amount of distribution courses. And for social sciences, I started with politics and government. Part of being from a very blue collar family is very involved in my parents' unions and local advocacy. Did a lot of door to door with both my parents for local candidates. And it turned out that I loved those courses so much. They were that relief from the tension of the science that I actually double majored in politics and government and zoology. But I was focused. I was like, I love the science. I'm going to go on to a PhD. That's what everyone told me I had to do to have a career in science. I opted to do my PhD at the State University of New York at Stony Brook because at that time, the genetics program at Stony Brook was the way to get to what I consider my dream institution, which was Cold Spring Harbor Lab. At Cold Spring Harbor, I joined the lab of Greg Hannon, and I was his first graduate student. So any of you who are listening who are or were first graduate students know that your experience is completely different from those who follow you. And I realized around year 3 that the PI life was not going to be for me. But what I really loved was Cold Spring Harbor, very open to the public. I loved explaining and getting people excited about the science that was going on at the lab. If you've ever been at Cold Spring Harbor, you have the lab on one side of the harbor and you have very large mansions on the other side. And they just wanted to know what was going on at the lab. And it was great to talk to them about, look at all this cool science. If you get a cab to take from the train station to go to Cold Spring Harbor, the cabbies know about federal funding of research because of Cold Spring Harbor. And around my 3rd year grad school, I started going to Capitol Hill Days here in Washington, D.C., representing Cold Spring Harbor. It was a variety of days. Some were focused on the state, some were focused on career stage, but they really fostered, they were like, you like to talk to people, that's awesome. And so my 4th year, I went to my committee and said I had started doing research on pursuing a career in science policy, and I had my ticket to graduate at year 5. So some career milestones. I kicked off my career as Christine Mirzayan Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Academies. I can't say enough good things about this program. It is a 10-week program where you get a taste of a science policy, and you work with one of the boards at the National Academies. You learn a lot about committee work. You learn how these ginormous reports are assembled, but you are also given the freedom to explore Washington, D.C. You can, I was done with my PhD, but you can be in the middle of your PhD. You can be within 5 years of your terminal degree. So you have this opportunity to try out the career in science policy before you buy into it. A lot of first steps are these longer fellowships. One of the more well-known is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships, but you're committing to a year. Some of my colleagues in the Ryan Fellowship knew within like 3 weeks that they were like, this is not what I thought it was. I'm going to look at other opportunities. So I started with a fellowship, and where I received the advice that I should have at least one interview, be it for a job or an informational interview per week while I was there. And my advisor guaranteed me if I did that, I would have a job at the end of my fellowship. One of those informational interviews did in fact lead to my first job at, it was a startup health advocacy organization, Faster Cures, part of the Milken Institute. I'm very proud of how far that organization has come in the time since I was part of the team. But really it was, I kept talking to different people within the organization. They didn't have a job and they made the job for me. And I was there for 2 years, met a lot of great, famous people, because that was part of the brand of the organization, but also had the opportunity to really build my network. I was one of 2 scientists at one point, and then at another point, I was the only scientist on staff. And so even though I was very junior in my career, I definitely had a lot of visibility in my position. Then after Faster Cures, I was looking for the next step. I was starting to miss my specific science, genetics, and there was an opportunity within the National Institutes of Health, staffing a federal advisory committee called the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Genetics, Health, and Society, or SAC-GHS. And I thought this was a perfect marriage of some of my interests from my undergrad, my politics and policy work, and my scientific training. This is a federal advisory committee, so definitely planning events, how to organize an agenda, learned a lot of great skills. I also learned that perhaps my mentality doesn't mesh very well with the pace of the federal government, but I certainly learned a lot in this job, this particular job. My next step was actually, I was approached by one of my mentors at the National Academies, and she said, hey, what are you up to? I said, I might be on the job market. Change of administration means my committee might go away. And she's like, hey, I like working for you or working with you. Would you come work for me? And she offered me a job at a startup in the private sector. It was a data analysis and program evaluation group called Discovery Logic. And I thought I was only going to go there for 6 months to a year, just to kind of get my bearings and figure out what the next step was going to be. But as you can see by the dates, I was there for 4 years. I also had the opportunity to undergo my first large acquisition. So Discovery Logic was so good at what it did that we were acquired by Thomson Reuters. So I had this flavor of a startup for-profit, and also got to see the underpinnings of a very large company, and I really enjoyed it. I stay in jobs as long as they're fun. And I was having fun when I was approached by who he's now retired, but my former boss, saying that he had an opportunity for me to run a science policy program at a very high profile organization, and the rest is history. So I've been at FASB since March of 2013. So yes, I just had my 8th anniversary. One key thing that I want to highlight, every job here that has a red star on it, I was invited to apply for. So you see that I've only cold applied for one job in my career. This is not just common to science policy. This is how you should approach your job search for in any career path. And if you take home one message from my presentation, besides the fact that I'm from Cleveland and I love Cleveland, know that you have to talk to people, and people will invite you to apply for jobs. You can't just wait for your applications to get reviewed. A little bit about FASB, if you're not familiar, so we are a coalition of 29 scientific societies, of which BDRP is one of our members. And our mission is to advance health and well-being by promoting research and education in biological and biomedical sciences through collaborative advocacy and service to our societies and their members. Jacqueline and I work in the Office of Public Affairs, and so we are probably, there are lots of other departments within FASB, but we are the face of the organization because we do the policy research and development. That would be my team. We do a lot of advocacy and serve as a government liaison on behalf of our members. In addition to our own coalition of 29 societies, we are piling on and making coalitions with other groups in DC and beyond. And we do a lot of communication and outreach on behalf of our members. So what do I actually do? And I think this sums it up. I'm also a horse person, so I feel like I'm herding cats, but they are the best cats possible. We have our member societies. They are 29 separate clients. And so this is a lot where Jacqueline was saying that my day looks a little different from hers. A lot of my interfacing is with the scientific societies, but everyone on my team, we figure out how each different member society works, what are their pain points. We have the individual scientists. So FASB itself does not have members beyond the societies, but all of our 29 societies represent a cumulative 130,000 scientists. So individual scientists will approach us and say, hey, what's FASB doing about this? And so we have to communicate with them. We also work with individual scientists as our volunteers. We are also wrangling agencies and their policies, we have very good relationships with the National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation. Those are the big two, but we also work with the Department of Energy, Office of Science, the Department of Agriculture, and the VA Medical Prosthetic Program. We do have a little bit of a remit to explain science to the public, certainly on some of the more tricky issues. We are one of the few organizations that will go out in front and openly advocate on the importance of animal research, which puts a target on our back, but it's an important set of resources. So we do a little bit of public outreach. A little squiggly line going to Congress. Our communications with Congress are varied. But we're always trying to get headway both in terms of appropriations, so federal funding for science, but also getting written into law certain actions that we would like to see agencies take, or tell congressional leaders, hey, that sounds good in legalese, but it might not actually turn out the policy change that you want. And then I would be remiss if I didn't point out that sometimes your cats can be disrupted by the dogs at the White House. The White House has its own agenda. We are in a very exciting time right now with a new administration where, you know, you have changeover in Congress, you have changeover in the White House, you have new agency leadership. So we are busy, but it is totally fun. My typical day, this is my dream day. This isn't what my day normally looks like. You know, ideally, my day would consist of 30% meetings, 50% writing and analysis, 10% admin, and 10% reacting to real-time stuff. And unfortunately, it tends to flip to a lot more in meetings and reacting to real-time stuff. But this is what Jacqueline was saying about the career progression. I try to protect this time for my team members so that they can do a lot more of that reading and writing and have that time to really, they are subject matter experts. I am a generalist at this point in my career. I know what everyone is working on, but I have not had time to read a National Academies report in months. So, you know, when you think about the breakdown of the day, this is a great question to ask, and you will get very different responses based on where someone is in their career. In terms of is science policy for you, I have this list of questions. You know, it is a fast-paced atmosphere. You have to be okay with being a generalist. I was totally fine with that right away. In fact, that was my concern when I was a PhD student, was that I was like, am I only going to work on these 3 oncoproteins for the rest of my life? So I love to dabble. I love to keep up with current events. I love to write and make my writing so that my parents, who are not scientists, they can read the Washington Update newsletter from FASB and understand what I'm doing. You know, I love to solve problems. I love to take different tactics to solving problems. And as much as our work can be reactive at times, I'm always looking for ways for us to be proactive, just like you're trying to get the lead on a certain field of science. Some skills that you might need to develop. The first one is a joke, but in DC, most of us do speak in acronyms. And so policy is very alphabet soup. You might have to learn a little bit about consensus building. You know, my experience in science was, you know, you were always trying not to get scooped. So consensus building might not be natural, but you know, in a coalition like FASB, you really have to play your cards right to make sure that you get a statement and get a letter out on FASB letterhead. The non-technical communications, I loved Jacqueline's comments on just practice writing in that active voice, practice all different formats, even if no one sees it, just write. You know, that familiarity with new stakeholder populations. No, I don't really like to network a ton, but I do love figuring out what makes a client or one of our member societies tick. And, you know, so that's how I balance my kind of about networking with, you know, what I need to do for my job. I love solving problems for our member societies. In my slides, and I won't go through this, but I do have, and we'll post these with the presentation recording, you know, you can look at science policy. I recommend everyone dip their toe into science policy. They should be familiar with the policies that govern the research that you're doing, regardless of what you do. Just be aware that there is this government that, whether or not you like it, has an impact on what you do and how you do it. And then, you know, in terms of transitioning to a science policy career, Jacqueline gave some great advice that's generalizable. There are fellowships. I feel very fortunate to have had one, but there are lots of things that you can do to make that jump. So, you know, I'm happy to take any questions. Here's my contact information. And I second the fact that if you cold LinkedIn me, I usually will respond. I'm a little slow because I'm slow on seeing the messages, but I very rarely turn down an opportunity for an informational interview. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Yvette, thank you so much for that. We do have a couple of comments here for you.
Okay. Okay, my scroll is not working over there very well. Okay.
I can read them if you want.
Oh, so I see the one from Ashley. What are some ways to have a career experience in science policy without moving to DC? Yeah, this is a common question. And the best thing about it is that government happens at the state level too. And, you know, whether or not you like it, it's there. But we have seen an increase in the number of state-based fellowships. It started with a California fellowship that was based off the Merzion program, but now a lot of states, I know Missouri has one, Connecticut. So there are state-based fellowships. Also, you have subject matter expertise. So one of the things that I was going to do if I couldn't make my career launch in DC was that I was going to volunteer my time. At that time, it was Senator Clinton's office. I had a position all lined up to go if I didn't have a job, and just start working on science policy issues. All politics is local. So you can even do policy at your home institution. You can start a science policy discussion group. You can work with your government relations office at your institution and see about bringing a government official to your campus. They love the photo ops, let me tell you. So, you know, anytime they can be seen wearing a lab coat or holding a Petri dish, they are really excited. So there are lots of opportunities, and Ashley, please feel free to follow up with me. I would love to discuss more, but I know I'm very long-winded. Self-awareness.
What would you say is the most fulfilling part of your job?
It's changed, you know, now that I'm a manager, you know, for me, I'm looking at wins for the team. You know, it's less about the work that I do, but having a great team and having FASB recognized for doing great work. Jacqueline is definitely part of that team, and finding and developing talent. As a manager, it's exciting yet terrifying to hire new talent, but you know, I've had staff members who've moved on, and I'm very proud of where they go. And they're part of my network. And you know, I've had great mentors that they've kept me in their network, and now that I'm in that role, it's I recognize that I'm developing talent, and when they're good, they're able to go and do other great things. So you know, figuring out what they want to do too. So that was a shift. That was actually what scared everything out of me as a grad student, because I didn't think that I would be a good PhD mentor. I thought that it would be terrifying to be in charge of someone's life, you know, their life project if it went wrong. But with policy, it's like, I like scoping where we have opportunities and letting the talent run. And it's really rewarding.
Thank you for that, Yvette. I am not seeing any other questions popping up, so I think that we will take the opportunity and switch gears to listen to Angela's story.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me, Paul?
We hear you fine, yes.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So I'll throw a few slides up here, and halfway through this, Alex, I'll just cue you on that. So if you guys don't mind to just oblige me here in some storytelling. So I'll take a slightly different approach in telling my story. You know, the art of storytelling is something that has been in existence probably as long as we've existed on Earth, right? I mean, you think about indigenous people and, you know, before the written language. So our oral history is really key. And I think in lieu of the conversations that we've had already today about, you know, the scientific jargon and these career paths that we can often be pushed into because it's just the trajectory that we're all introduced to, right? The same is true for translating these really amazing innovations that we hear about in science to the public. And so, Yvette, I really appreciated your introduction, because like you, one of the unique things that I bring up in any public speaking engagement is where I'm from and I'm just a couple hours north of you from Detroit, Michigan. Same history, right? In that my father worked for General Motors, you know, Motor City, and my mother, neither my father or mother had college degrees. I was the first in my family from both sides to go to college and to pursue higher education. And so there was no one leading the way. So when you talk about mentorship, that's really key. And if you don't have a role model and you don't see a path, then, you know, you're once again allowing curiosity to kind of drive that, right? And if you really break down who we are as scientists, at the end of the day, we are people who allow our curiosity to drive us. And so I wanted to bring that theme back in my intro here. Before I get into some more of the logistics of my background and my credentials, I wanted to read a quote that says, we should never wait for science to give us permission to do the uncommon. If we do, then we are turning science into another religion. And that was said by Dr. Joe Dispenza in one of his many books. Now, taking that thought of doing the uncommon, right? We've all been put up against this incredible pandemic, and it has really caused the everyday layperson, if you will, to suddenly look to the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry, politics, all the things that we've talked about already in our little chunks and little bites of our career path here on as panelists. And for those lay people to kind of look to us and say, what do you got? What do you got for us? What's the solution, right? And I think the idea in science is that there is no almighty solution, that we're learning every day as we go, as we are in our careers and as we are in the industry. But for me, what I think really drove my curiosity is the interest in drugs, legal drugs, pharmaceuticals, that is, right? As opposed to illegal drugs, I guess. And so when I started my career, like Yvette, I, again, grew up blue collar, no intro to science, but thankfully my parents fostered that curiosity in me and allowed me to do necropsies in my first cockatiel that died and took me to the nature center. And so I knew right away that I was going to go to school and study biology. And I can't remember if it was you, Yvette, as well. Maybe we have tons in common, but I also went to a liberal arts college and decided I'd pick 3 majors. So I studied biology, neuroscience, and religion. Why not? Speaking of religion. And so in that process, I learned that on my second week of college, while doing brain surgery in rats in a stereotaxic instrument and looking at endogenous peptides, literally week 2, I was paired with this neuroendocrinologist who was just getting started and had this physiology background and was just throwing me in the mix. And I'm like, what in the world? What is this world? I just thought I was going to get a degree in life science and, you know, look at some more anatomy pictures, right? But every little step exposes you. And the more you ask questions, the more you discover, right? Isn't that the basis of science? So I finished my first, I think, semester, and I was invited by my mentor, whose lab I was helping set up, to apply for funding. Yay! Who loves signing up for grants? And so each summer I had an internship as an undergraduate, and I was so grateful for my liberal arts education because I would compare myself to my friends who went down the street in Ann Arbor to the University of Michigan or Michigan State University, and I was on the west side of Michigan going to this school called Hope College. They were ranked actually 4th in the nation for undergraduate research. Who knew, right? That I just happened to land on this. And so I would talk to them and I would say, what do you mean you haven't done brain surgery yet in rats? I thought that was normal, but they hadn't. So I was literally given so many opportunities by picking a school that was focused on science and focused on, yes, they cared about, you know, their pre-vet and pre-med and pre-dental gradings and credentials for those for pre-med, for example, but they also allowed the liberal arts side to filter in and allow people to have different perspectives on evolution, for example, and interdisciplinary perspective. And so as I was doing this research, I acquired as many mentors as I could. I worked with my main investigator, and then I worked with a couple of others who maybe focus more on chemistry or more on psychology or more on neuroscience. And I was one of the first to finish that minor degree in neuroscience. It was a brand new program to that school. So I was even part of pioneering that, right? And in conversations with other people, when it was time to go and get a job after having 3 summers of NSF funding for research for undergraduates and going to places like East Africa and studying bird behavior patterns in the wild, and ring dove courtship behaviors, hormones and behaviors, sex behavior research in Wisconsin, and gecko teeth replacement patterns with histology work in Texas, and some little bit of marine biology, the whole gamut of the bio world. I'm like, what do I do now? Do I have to keep applying for grants? Do I have to keep writing papers? And it was great. I had first author papers as an undergrad. I mean, that was like something, again, I was comparing to my friends who now were moving on to graduate school and hadn't yet been first author on a paper. I mean, how cool. I mean, that's what is so glorified in academia. And so one of my women mentors, one of the women that were, I think she was really one of my first role models. She said, there've been a couple of students who like working with animals, and they're working at this contract research organization. I'd never heard of a contract research organization. And I know you really like working with animals and the hormones and behavior and that kind of thing. Why don't you go and apply to this job? So I applied to this company that was 45 minutes south of my school, also in West Michigan, and they were the 3rd largest contract research organization in the world doing preclinical research, which I think most of you know is, non-clinical, so usually animal work. And it was a huge facility, almost 2 square foot miles. And I learned how to dose rats every day, day in and day out, for $15 an hour. And I'm like, this isn't it. Graduate school sounded exhausting, more grant writing, but $15 an hour dosing rats day in and day out, it just wasn't it. And yet I appreciated that experience, and it's such an important job, but I was still so driven by my curiosity and what was this big picture. And so I want to just kind of introduce this concept of a big picture for a second. Going back really briefly into my undergraduate experience, I remember in the first few months of working with my mentor and studying these endogenous peptides, and we would kind of extract, these different peptides in the brain and then re-inject and see, does it increase sex behavior or not, or how does it affect appetite, and have all the qualitative and quantitative markers that we would do. And I asked my mentor, like, what is the point of all of this? Why are we doing this? And he said, well, maybe one day this particular peptide could replace Viagra, because Viagra was discovered by accident, right? It was a cardiovascular drug that was repurposed. And so maybe we can actually find a more viable, healthier, safer, less side effects, right? Drug to help increase both male and female reproductive behaviors. And I thought, okay, well, that's really cool. Well, so how long is that going to take? And he said, it's going to take about 10 to 20 years. I don't know. There was no clear pathway from what I was doing in basic research that wasn't even really considered translational, which we often use as a term, into biotech or big pharma, or how do drugs get to market? I still don't know. Here I am, 15 years later, still asking that question. And I just wanted to point that out, that the big picture and that curiosity, here they come together. And I'm like, how the heck does a drug get to market, right? So now I'm working in this job. I'm gavaging rats with these unknown materials that I'm never going to know what they are, because the protocols are all confidential. Sponsors from all over the world. I'll never forget the one from Canada who was studying medical marijuana, which, in 2008, when I was doing this job, was like so novel, right? Oh, Canada, they're so progressive, right? And so speaking of legal drugs, right? And you fast forward 3 years in that job, I triple certified. So I had a bachelor's degree, a bachelor's of arts degree in biology with those 2 minors. I certified each year as a laboratory animal technologist. That was through the American Association for Laboratory Animal Science, right? That was another organization that was phenomenal, great resources. You really learn the importance of animal husbandry and care And all of that goes into research for those of us who aren't volunteering to just take any novel drug, right? All that data is so important. And just kind of the nuances around it and the taboo around it, and, you know, how 90% of animal research is in rodents, not what you're told by PETA, right, with monkeys and dogs, and just like really getting a grip on some of that. So I started to volunteer within that organization. So I think it might have been Jacqueline who said, you know, you really need to be part of a scientific organization. I've been part of many, and I absolutely agree with that it helps you engage in a pathway that's already familiar with you to inter-network within your peers, right? That who knows, you could turn out like Yvette and just jump and get invited to different jobs later, right? So I really want to agree to that point that if it weren't for me volunteering and sitting on boards, even at 20-something years old, right, that I may not be where I am today and have taken the risk that I did. So 3 years in that job. And like Yvette, I like to talk to people. So I was told, hey, can you walk the sponsor down the hallway to their fruit basket whenever they were there on site doing studies with us. My first exposure to industrial research, my first exposure to FDA showing up for audits, all these things that were just so, nobody told me about this in academia, right? And I realized that there was another side, that I could become a vendor, that I could get into sales, and that I could zoom out even more, see more projects from a bigger bird's eye view. And so I ended up going to one of the ALAS meetings and was offered a job between two different companies. One was big pharma, and one was an even larger, like the largest contract research organization at the time for preclinical research. And so I took that job, and I worked there for 6 years as an account manager, which was basically an entry-level salesperson. I was the youngest salesperson they had ever hired. I had no idea how to pack my suitcase or do a sales call. I had to find mentors who would teach me how to do that. How do I book flights? I had a $1,500 credit limit. And I told the company, I can't book all these flights to go see clients. I have no idea what I'm doing. So they had to figure out how to get me a company credit card. I'd never been through that before. And later, I think they realized that young sales folks were pretty cheap on the payroll. So they started hiring more. I killed my numbers. I was earning them 20% in my territory year over year for those 6 years. And I realized that I was really good at sales, and I loved going into labs, and I toured hundreds, if not thousands, of laboratories all across the country and was exposed to so much freaking science. I never left science. I just got deeper and deeper into it and saw more and more from so many perspectives. And like many of us, became a generalist that knows a little bit about a ton of things, right? So if you will, Alex, pull up the slides. I want to just jump ahead. Thank you guys for obliging me on some of that storytelling. Once I got into sales, I was cold called by a company that actually Paul and I worked at together. So that is how I know Paul. And Paul, thank you so much for putting this discussion together. I've actually gone back to my alma mater and spoke on this very topic of alternative careers with other students. It's been a theme throughout my life. I think it's so important. I'm so passionate about it because I really would not be where I am today if it were not for that. And I really want to thank the panelists for their vulnerability as well, and Heather for coordinating, and Alex, thank you so much for pulling up those slides. So after I was working my second sales job now as a senior business development executive with this big fancy title, I was working for a company that was a nonprofit. And I was really struggling because nonprofits can move a little slow, okay? And I really enjoyed kind of the commercial speed. And so I was struggling there, to be honest with you. And here I was in boardrooms with incredible biotech companies that were my clients that I was trying to sign on work that they were outsourcing to me, right? That was part of my role, sort of as a liaison. And I was privy to conversations that were so mind-blowing about innovations in science and in the drug development world that I would get on planes, trains, and highways and talk to my Uber driver or talk to the person, you know, sitting next to me on the plane about what I just got to talk about as much as I could without breaching confidentiality, of course. And I just realized that, man, this is such a cool industry, developing drugs. How do I talk about this and the risk and the research and the side effects and the benefits and all the science involved without breaching confidentiality, but talking about it to the public. And so at the time, I really wasn't a podcast participant or listener, but I just decided randomly that I was going to start a podcast. And so I did. And I started Legal Drugs Podcast. I actually quit my job. I formed my own LLC, Legal Drugs Agency. I did that for 2 years, from January 2019 up until recently, where I just started a new job. But in the last 2 years, I was able to go to conferences, interview my favorite CEOs from my favorite biotech companies who are curing HIV and doing all kinds of incredible work. And I became my own boss and really just drove my own day-to-day, right? And so it was kind of like what Paul was asking Carrie at the beginning, was there ever a time where you had to create something for yourself? Yes, because I burned out so much in trying to fit a certain role and fit into a place that wasn't really working for me, or just burning out from traveling, or just, you can burn out in any job, right? And I just needed to reinvigorate that passion within me and why I really am here. And I gave myself a new title. I call myself an innovative drug development tour guide, digital tour guide. And really what that meant was just capturing stories and then finding a way to break down the scientific jargon and explain it to people like my neighbor at a barbecue, right? Or my own mother, who's the one who actually gives a crap about this stuff, because maybe she's borderline diabetic, or maybe my father just had 3 heart attacks. True story. I podcasted that, right? He sits with 3 stents and he lives on statins. This stuff affects our everyday lives. So if you listen to my podcast, you hear me say that I break down what it takes to get a drug to market and try to demystify the pharmaceutical industry, because it affects our everyday lives. So if you go to the next slide, Alex, these are just some photos of kind of the last couple of years of things that I was doing at different scientific meetings. I took my mobile equipment on the road with me. Like I said, got to interview some of my favorite CEOs, favorite people. I've interviewed lay people. I've interviewed expert scientists, PhDs, MDs, you name it. I've had over 33 podcasts and thousands and thousands of downloads all over the world. It's just been so humbling. I've encouraged and helped mentor at least 3 other podcasts. When I was first going to these conferences, people were telling me, "You're crazy. What's a podcast? How are you going to make any money?" I actually had sponsorship and made several $1,000s from sponsorships. So you can be as creative as you want to be and make an income. I think really for me, COVID was really tough as a consultant, as a social media kind of strategist, as a business development strategist focusing on preclinical drug development. Some of my contracts fell through. People were really tight on their budgets. And so what I decided to do is go ahead and look for a job. And I had been looking for jobs casually here and there over the last few years, even when I was in my last formal role. And I really didn't feel comfortable in aligning with some of these companies, just in terms of the progressiveness. It was really important to me that I keep my voice. And finally, a company I had been chasing for about 3 years that I thought was super progressive, sort of the Google of CROs. As I said, actually recently in an interview on one of their podcasts, we have a podcast called Molecular Moments, and I came on as a guest. So I encourage you all to listen to both Legal Drugs Podcast and Molecular Moments, the Bioagiletics podcast. But I found this company, Bioagiletics, that's what they're called, and they did not require that I stop blogging or that I stop podcasting, which was really key for me, because sometimes, an employer would, require that you kind of silence your voice or just kind of stick within the messaging, which is understandable, right? And they didn't do that. And in fact, they took it as an advantage, and they said, we really appreciate the broad net that you have cast. Help us stay relevant. Help us stay, on the up and up. And I think they're one of the greatest companies. I feel like I've found my dream job, and I'm really grateful for that. And I'm really grateful to be able to keep talking about drug development, what it takes to get a drug to market the legal way, right? And to continue to encourage other people to use their voice on social media as well. So last slide, if you guys have any ideas for interviews, collaborations, you're welcome to contact me on any of the social media platforms. And I'm sorry, I probably spoke the longest, Paul, but hopefully we'll have 10 minutes here or so for questions.
Angela, I am not surprised that you took the longest to talk. I've known you for a while now. So,
I'll take that as a compliment, Paul.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So does anybody have any questions for Angela? Angela, I will say that, you know, I have known you over the years now, and one of the things that I have always valued about our interactions is the fact that you have challenged me as well to be more outspoken and to voice, you know, find my own voice quite a bit more as well. And the fact that you do exemplify the fact that sometimes opportunities are not handed to you. You have to have the courage to make them yourselves. So I wanted to thank you for that. While we're waiting to see if there are some additional questions that come on board, I do want to share with everybody. So growing up, my father, apparently a lot of us have quite a bit in common. I'm the first one in my family to go to college as well, blue-collar background. Myself growing up, I got, you know, my father, the fount of all wisdom, would give me a lot of advice. And, you know, as I was talking with him about, you know, what I wanted to do with my life and careers, the advice he gave me was just keep your head down, do a good job, and you will be recognized. Worst advice I've ever gotten in my life. Better advice I got from actually my first job, which with after school, and that was with Tacey White. Many of you know Tacey. Tacey sat me down one day and said, if you don't toot your own horn, nobody's going to do it for you. So how does this tie into everything? Jacqueline, interpersonal skills, the way that you talked about interacting. Yvette, again, these networks. Following your own passion, creating those opportunities when you get a chance to, or when you need to. All of those you really have to do. I'm a natural introvert. That was the reason why I asked you, Jacqueline, about those interpersonal skills. That was something I had to learn. I had to develop those skills. It can be done. It may not be natural for you to go out and talk with people, but you were right. Do it anyway. And you do it and you do it and you do it, and then it will become natural and it will become easier.
Yeah, so, and I see a comment came up, Paul, and you're right. Yes. And I mean, to your point again, it's a skill that we can also sharpen. I think as scientists, we think like in the beginning of my career, I'm like, I don't have a voice. How would I ever build a voice? But it's just something that you have to practice like anything, and you have to be willing to take the risk of getting your hand slapped. Do you know how many times I've had my hand slapped from organizations I've worked for and things I've posted on LinkedIn that I thought were positive, but, you know, oh no, somebody else could see that as negative because you're overpraising someone else. Like, I mean, just the PR can be so sticky. But if you don't try, then you're silencing yourself. And I think that's really, really key. So to this question that Karen wrote in for Carrie and I, and Carrie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think I think Twitter is being used more and more by scientists for outreach. And it's incredibly important. One of my most downloaded episodes was from Sarah Ives, who appeared on the Netflix series, docuseries Pandemic, right? Shortly after that aired, one of the large CROs ended up buying one of the two companies she was working for over in San Francisco. And the Netflix series had 7-8 million views, right? You could go and talk to Sarah on Instagram, on Twitter, wherever. And that's what I did. I cold called her, I think on LinkedIn as well, and said, hey, will you come on my podcast? And so, I mean, there's just so many ways to connect with scientists now through platforms like Twitter, for example, that we really had never had access to, I think, when I was, you know, an undergraduate from 2004 to 2008. So it really is something that is uncomfortable for us at the beginning, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, Paul. But if we don't practice it, then, you know, there's no way we're going to get better at it.
Agreed.
I would say one
Carrie,
good thing is that scientists are used to being rejected, so you just brush it off and just go. So
yeah.
Very true. Carrie, do you have a response to Karen's question?
Yeah, I can definitely speak more to like the Instagram, TikTok side of things than I can to Twitter. I'm not really on Twitter, for better or for worse. But as, you know, somebody in a health profession, I think it's really important for, you know, scientists and even clinicians to be on social media, because you better believe there's people who don't have credentials who are on social media saying and putting out mixed messages. And even with the way media spins, you know, outcomes of, you know, papers as if they're the only paper that's, you know, ever demonstrated some sort of result, or it's really controversial, and not putting it in the appropriate context. It's really important for people who have that background to, you know, do the justice to those papers, kind of walk people through how you should think about and critically evaluate scientific research, and, you know, delivering how that translates into the clinical side of things as well. All of it's so important because there's so much misinformation and opportunities for confusion. But it, like I think a lot of people addressed in their talks, it's not something that we're really taught as a skill, how to kind of translate the scientific jargon into, you know, something that can be easily, you know, absorbed by the general public. It's something that I've had to work on myself, and I've had the benefit of working with somebody who, my co-author Diana, works in communication, so she's able to kind of translate some stuff for me when I'm not able to do it myself. So, you know, it's definitely something to, you know, take very seriously, to work on, even if it's just having a small following and talking to your following and just kind of getting the practice for yourself and building your own little social media set. When you do encounter, you know, people in the public, you can translate that science for them easily. But it's very important.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists. I think today has been actually excellent. I loved hearing all of your stories. And if the attendees got a tenth of what I did, then you have filled their day.
Oh, thanks, Paul.
Alex,
thanks for the idea.
If you would, we can't end this session, though, without us pointing out that the 61st annual meeting for the Birth Defects Research and Prevention Society is coming soon. In fact, it's June 24th. The focus of this year is building bridges from innovation to application. So this again goes in line with what we were talking about, of translating all of that science into really making it useful to people. And how do we do that? There are a lot of different scientific programs that are going on. I'm not going to read the entire list here for you. This will be made available to you, and if you're really interested, you can go onto the website, and a complete agenda will be there for you. Alex, next slide. Abstracts due March 31st. Oops, you're already late. So, of course, those are the ones that are really looking for platform presentations, things like that. If you still have abstracts and you just say, I've got to get it in, go ahead and send it to us. We might be able to actually fit it in as a late-breaking item. Notice I said might, but it's always worth a try. There are some weekly education courses that we are hosting in July as well: crinofish morphogenesis and teratogenesis, development and disorders of the GI tract, and single-cell RNA sequencing. So again, the website is listed there, and I really encourage everybody to and I have, I think, 30 seconds to go. Okay, One of the things that's also going on is we have a webinar coming up on May 4th, and that is being co-sponsored by the Developmental Neurotoxicology Society as well as BDRP. And again, here you can see that we have Michael Gary, Michael Ashner, Susan Korig, and Deborah Siegel, who are going to be speaking on that. And thank you. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email us here, or you will have all of these presentations. They're available, and also a recording of this will be posted on the website. So again, thank you everybody for attending. Bye now.